Welcome back to Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton. I'm Ollie Hayes, and today I'm going to be reacting to the news surrounding the director of football role at Everton and talking all things Dan Ashworth. So let's get straight into it. And today's headline news came from TalkSport, and it was Dan Ashworth is a candidate for the director of football role at Everton under the new Friedkin leadership. Obviously, we know that Kevin Thelwell's contract is up at the end of the summer, so the Friedkins might be looking to bring in their own personnel to do the job at Everton. And we asked you on X what you thought, and of nearly 1,400 votes, 67% were in favour, 23% were unsure, and 10% were against. And obviously, that poll is still running over on X at Everton Newsfeed if you want to go over and make your thoughts and vote. But I wanted to sort of give my thoughts on it and sort of give you my thoughts on what does it mean for Everton, and obviously what does Dan Ashworth do, and sort of looking into his background and his history in the game, and obviously Dan Ashworth, he's the former Newcastle, Brighton, Manchester United director of football. He's also worked in the England setup as well. Obviously, I'll come back to why that's significant a little bit later on in the video, but. It seems that his best work in football has been at Newcastle and Brighton. Obviously, I'm not going to read in too much into what he's done at Manchester United because he hasn't been there for too long. But if you look at his work at Newcastle and Brighton, he's definitely makes significant wholesale changes, and he's been able to adopt a model of unearthing players for little fees. You look at players like Cucurella, Lamptey, Jan-Paul van Hecke, Moises Caicedo. They're all Ashworth signings at Brighton, for example, and he's been able to unearth them for a small fee and sell them on high, which I think is a model that the Friedkins and Everton will want to adopt. I think that's certainly a way that football is going these days. You look at teams like Brighton, for example, they've come up from the Championship and been able to build a model which has seen them go from League One, being steady into the Championship, being steady, and then earning that promotion to the Premier League and being able to become an established Premier League team. You look at them playing in Europe last season, for example, they've been able to hit the heights of Europe. And I think that us as Evertonians, that's what we want. We want to be able to follow that model and hit the heights of Europe and play a European football. That's what all Evertonians want. So I think definitely looking at the Brighton model, for example, I think that's definitely something positive to see. If you're looking at Dan Ashworth, for example, his positive work there, he's taking them sort of from rags to riches, for example. So I think that's definitely positive to see. And then if you're looking at Newcastle as well, he went in with a lot of money. Obviously, we know that the Saudi PIF, they took over Newcastle at the same sort of time that Dan Ashworth came in. So if you're looking at that, for example, he had a big pool of money, but he didn't sign them on. He didn't spend it on Hollywood signings, for example, much like Farhad Moshiri when he first came into Everton. I think that's something that Everton fans will be so careful of, where if the Freakins do come in and there is a pot of money there to spend, I think Evertonians will be so careful about not wanting those Hollywood signings. For example, if you look at the amount of money we spent, Yannick Bolasie for large sums of money, Davy Klaassen, Gylfi Sigurdsson, all pretty much leaving for nothing. So I know that's only scratching the surface on the type of signings that Farhad Moshiri made during his tenure. So I think a lot of people will be so wary that we won't want the Freakins to come in and then employ people that are going to, have tendency to spend that large pot of money on Hollywood signings and players that aren't really fit for a setup. And if you're looking at Dan Ashworth, for example, if you're looking at his CV, he's definitely showed that he can do that. He can do the same at Newcastle, for example, and unearth small talent, build them up and sell them on. You look at Yankuba Minter, for example. I think he was playing his football over in Denmark at Michelin. So you're looking at players like that, young players that you can bring in and sell them on for a higher fee. Obviously, we know all the issues with Newcastle and their FFP, for example. That's a different story. Obviously, we know Everton's issues as well. I think Evertonians are probably sick of hearing about FFP. But if you're looking at him, for example, if you're looking at his tenure at Newcastle and how he interacted with the staff there, Eddie Howe's always spoken very highly of Dan Ashworth. So I think if you're going off the model of Brighton and Newcastle and you're looking at his CV and his tenure from there, I think there's only positive words to say about him. He's done really well. And then obviously moving to Manchester United at the start of this season under the new Ineos regime over there. Obviously, Jim Ratcliffe coming into Manchester United, he does own Lausanne and he does own Nice as well. So, that's a sort of multi-club model that maybe Dan Ashworth wasn't really too comfortable going into. I wouldn't probably read too much into his time at Manchester United. Obviously, there's been speculation recently in the media about why he's left. Obviously, there is a lot of conflicting personalities over on that Manchester United board. It does seem like a club where it is very difficult to make lasting change. And, a person like Dan Ashworth, if he were to come in under the Freaking Group, for example, he would pretty much have free reign to do whatever he wanted and really build a setup and build a strategy for Everton. Whereas at Manchester United, you've got so many conflicting interests and so many conflicting ideas on that board. It's very difficult for him to do his job. So I really wouldn't read too much into his time at Manchester United. Obviously, that you do hear murmurs of why he was, and I'll get into that further on in the video. But you do hear murmurs of why he left Manchester United and reasons for that. But I do think scratching the surface and looking from the outside, looking into that club, it does seem like a very difficult club to make lasting change. So as I said before, I wouldn't read too much into that Manchester United one. But a lot of questions will be on the lips of Evertonians. I think the biggest one will be who would be the manager under Dan Ashworth, and obviously due to all the speculation in recent months, we do expect Sean Dyche to leave at the end of his contract, or even earlier if results rapidly deteriorate under Sean Dyche this season. We do expect him to leave either mid-season this year or at the end of his contract at the end of this current season. So the question will be on everyone's lips: who would Dan Ashworth bring in? I think the easiest link to make is Graham Potter due to their success at Brighton. I think they did work well together. As I mentioned earlier, the type of players that they both signed and brought into Brighton. And if you're looking at Graham Potter, for example, he developed these players really well. You look at Caicedo, Marco Correa, Lamptey, they were playing very good football under Graham Potter, for example, at Brighton. So I think that's probably the easiest link to make, sort of a Potter-Ashworth revolution at Everton, like they did at Brighton. I think that for me, I'd be personally very happy with that. I'd be happy to see that. I do think Graham Potter does have something still to offer in the game. I think he was probably a little bit hard done by at Chelsea. He probably came in at the wrong time. So I would be fine with that. I think I'd be really happy with Graham Potter and Dan Ashworth both coming into the club. And I think that's the easiest managerial link to make. But obviously, there have been some reports emerging from Manchester United that Dan Ashworth wanted Gareth Southgate to be the manager there. And that's one of the main reasons why he's left. Obviously, it would make sense. I mentioned earlier in the video that he has had some time in the youth setup at England. Obviously, when Gareth Southgate first came in under for England after Roy Hodgson in the 2016 2016 Euros, for example, there needed to be wholesale change from top to bottom of the England setup. So Dan Ashworth oversaw a lot of that, and obviously Gareth Southgate was the manager of the men's senior national team at that time. So I think those rumours and those reports do have a little bit of legs. Obviously, they do have a little bit of weight behind them because they have worked together in the past. I'm not so sure I'd want Southgate as Everton manager. Obviously, we saw him get a lot of criticism for the way he played with England. Obviously, he had so many top players when he had the England job and, didn't really utilise them. So would he come into Everton and maybe adopt a little bit of a different system? I'm not so sure. I think it'd be a very volatile atmosphere having an Everton fan base with Gareth Southgate as the manager, put it that way. I don't think it's the best combination, which is probably making me more unsure and maybe putting me into that 23% category, which I mentioned in the poll at the start of the video, putting me into that category of Dan Ashworth rather than saying that I'm all for it, because I'm not so sure on Gareth Southgate. I'm not sure he will be the right man for the job, but obviously there's other managers out there. You look at Eddie Howe, he seemed to be under a little bit of pressure at Newcastle, for example. If his job did become untenable at Newcastle and he was available, would you have him at Everton? I think I definitely would have Eddie Howe. Obviously, as I said before, they've worked together at Newcastle, building a similar sort of project with a decent pot of money. Eddie Howe and Dan Ashworth working together, I think I'd definitely be behind that. But I think the most likely one coming in would be Graham Potter, and that partnership would be reunited at Everton from the old Brighton days. But that is all from me today on Dan Ashworth and sort of my thoughts on this link of him being the Everton director of football in the coming months under the Friedkin Group. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. Obviously, I've mentioned sort of Brighton and Newcastle. If we were to follow those models, would you be happy with Dan Ashworth taking the job of Kevin Thelwell as the director of football, or would you like to see someone completely different take the director of football job? Let me know your thoughts in the comments on that one, and make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon.